Everybody, we're going to talk about German Expressionism right now. I'm very excited to do it. I'm excited to talk about all of these things, but German Expressionism is just super cool. Those of you who are art history students, either past or present, will have probably heard of Expressionism before, or certainly abstract Expressionism. And that's basically what this is coming out of, is just applied to cinema. As you know from Expressionist paintings like Edvard Munch's The Scream, or abstract Expressionists like Jackson Pollock or Mark Rothko, the idea behind Expressionism is a move away from the accurate representation of the natural world to instead distorting the natural world to reflect the interior landscape of the artist, right? A painting like The Scream is not really about what that person on that bridge looks like. It's about how that person feels, right? Or how the artist feels at the time, and rendering that visible through the manipulation of reality, usually meaning just making it disordered. And so it's the same thing for German Expressionism, except now it's going to be applied to movies. And so what we get here is movies that are less interested with the accurate representation of the external world and much more about projecting the internal landscape, the internal emotional and psychological landscape of a character or of the filmmaker onto the natural world. And so what we are going to see then is a nightmarish world that doesn't look like reality. There are no German Expressionist comedies. It's not funny at all. And so what we see would be like in the top image here from the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the sets are completely unrealistic. We're going to have things done at off-kilter, oblique angles. You're going to have painted backdrops. Everything is basically a different shade of black and gray. And really extreme camera angles, either really low, really high, even canted to the side like a Dutch angle. You're also going to see, like in the bottom here, this still from F.W. Murnau's film Sunrise, you'll see double exposure or superimposition used to communicate someone's internal landscape. We can't see inside that character's head, but here through the use of double exposure, we can see what he's thinking about. And so again, it's taking what's in his head, what's in his emotional state, and putting it on the screen so that other people can see it. In all cases, high contrast lighting is the name of the game. Chiaroscuro lighting, the bigger the contrast, the better. Allegedly, the German filmmaker Fritz Lang was upset with his cinematographer because the cinematographer couldn't get the shadows dark enough. So he had the art director paint the shadows onto the wall to get it as black as possible. That's German Expressionism in a nutshell, right? It's never dark enough. But what they're going for here are this is all engineered to create disorientation in the viewer, right? The sort of spatial disorientation is there to communicate the psychological discomfort of the world, right? And of course, this is, as you can probably guess, is a response to World War I. Right? The trauma of World War I creates the idea that, well, the nightmares are no longer in our dreams. The nightmares are the world that we live in. And so this is the work of traumatized and shell-shocked people sort of sleepwalking through a world they don't understand. That's essentially German Expressionism, but it's also Europe in the 20s. The key filmmakers would be Murnau and Fritz Lang, both of whom came over to Hollywood in the late 20s and early 30s, both with for the allure of Hollywood, and in Lang's case to flee the Nazis. Now, the earliest German Expressionist film would be this film like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which makes great use of set design to create its expressionist landscape more than using cinematography, say. So here you can see lots of theatrical painted on sets with raked floors to create weird sloping walks. Everything is out of proportion. So, people dwarfed by their surroundings or rendered giants by their surroundings. you see that kind of stuff going on here. The story of Caligari is of a hypnotist who hypnotizes this man here and turns him into a sleepwalking murderer who kills people at the hypnotist's bidding. And so that's the nightmare of the story. Is it's basically like a serial killer horror movie with hypnosis involved. In here, you can also probably see the influence that this style would have on a filmmaker like Tim Burton. The sleepwalker here basically is like a proto Edward Scissorhands. But again, notice the theatricality of this, where there are different shots, there are lots of camera angles, but the main effect could also be reproduced on the stage. So later German Expressionist films are going to do the same thing, but do them in a more cinematic fashion rather than a theatrical one. And so let's look at where that kind of starts. The next one is from 1922, an Ethel Murnau's film Nosferatu, which is an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. So here we have Count Orloff, who is about to surprise this poor guy. So in this film, the effects are going to be more from lighting and cinematography than they are from dramatically unrealistic set design. Murnau did not have the rights to Bram Stoker's Dracula when he made this film, so the adaptation was illegal, and the film was had an injunction placed against it, and it was supposed to be destroyed as a result of the court ruling. But instead, someone managed to smuggle a print of the movie out, and so Nosferatu barely escaped being lost forever. And without it, we wouldn't have one of our earliest horror movies that basically defines the horror genre and the style of working with light and shadow. The cinematographer that Murnau worked with the most, Karl Freund, he goes on to either be the cinematographer or the director for all of the Universal Pictures monster movies of the early 30s, right? Dracula, The Mummy, etc. So we wouldn't have the monster movie as we know it without the German Expressionists. Nor would we have the science fiction movie as we know it, or at least the dystopian one, without Fritz Lang's film Metropolis. And here we're going to see Lang use every aspect of German Expressionism in the opening to the film. We have the painted backdrops with the kind of wild shapes. We also have the superimpositions and double exposures of both extreme close-ups of images as well as abstract shapes. And there's this cool one, I think, in the next shot where it's going to be two different images of spinning gears imposed together like this to give us an overwhelming feeling of what industry is doing to people, which is largely what this film is about. And so this one, you get films like Blade Runner, Minority Report, even something like The Matrix, as well as Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 music video, as you'll see in just a moment. And so these are it's the shift change at the factory. And now we get a look at the set design that comes in as well, and the cinematography. So Lang's film here becomes kind of the total package of German Expressionism. This film is also a good example of a film that was, parts of it were thought lost. And then in the early 2000s, someone found a 16 millimeter print of the film that had about 20 minutes that were missing from the movie up to that point that have since been restored and reincorporated into the film. So, sometimes we find stuff, right? And here's an example of the Expressionists don't like title cards in their silent films. They think they take away from the movie or interrupt the film. So Lang and Murnau, they find ways to either avoid title cards altogether or, like this, to use them to be part of the story rather than an interruption of it. And it's really pretty cool. It's quite effective. Metropolis also has had several prominent scores made for it over the years. This is a popular thing that you'll get different bands or musicians to perform live scores at screenings of these movies. In the 80s, there was a big version of this movie scored by the Italian electro-pop composer Giorgio Moroder. So that's Metropolis. And now, finally, I'll show you this, a clip from Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans by F.W. Murnau. This is not technically a German film. This is an American film. William Fox hired Murnau to come to the United States to make a movie in Hollywood. And Fox offered Murnau a blank check, basically. Gave him carte blanche, full creative control of the movie, and all of the resources that Fox had at his disposal, and all Fox wanted Murnau to do was to make the greatest motion picture ever. He kind of did. It still makes the top 10 list of greatest movies of all time, and it was a flop upon its release because it comes out basically at the same time as Sound. And so despite all of the amazing visual achievements of this movie, people wanted to hear people talk instead. But here, this clip gives us a great example of what Murnau was experimenting with, what he called the untethered camera. He wanted his camera and his movie to seem like it could go anywhere and not be bound by, space in the same way. And so here you get this pretty remarkable tracking shot, and it's not even the whole shot, this clip that I'm showing you, where the camera can go anywhere. See, it can go over this fence post without stopping. The man cannot. So this is sort of like Murnau trying to come up with an early version of the Steadicam, some 50 years before it's invented. And there's several shots like this in the movie that are quite dramatic. Here, we think we've stepped into the man's point of view, but actually just after the end of this shot, the man enters from the left. It turns out to be our point of view. It's kind of a cool trick. So now, after German Expressionism, what's its legacy? Siegfried Kracauer, the German film theorist, writes this book called From Caligari to Hitler, in which he argues that German Expressionism kind of becomes the metaphor for Germany in the 20s, particularly the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, in that the German people are these traumatized sleepwalkers who are lying in wait to be controlled by a charismatic madman who will direct them toward committing murder. Essentially, the German people after World War I, the charismatic madman being Adolf Hitler. And so this is a very popular kind of psychoanalytic reading of art in Germany during the Weimar period. Probably the biggest legacy on at least American cinema from German Expressionism would be the film noir, which are kind of 40s and 50s crime pictures that use all of the kind of film noir visual techniques transplanted to a more American crime picture. And the reason that it happens that way is because most of the directors who made those films came out of Germany. And were German Expressionist filmmakers. And so we have a lot of directors who come from Germany and then have very established careers in Hollywood, like Lang and Murnau, Billy Wilder, Ernst Lubitsch as well. But we also have Alfred Hitchcock, who was heavily influenced by German Expressionism in the early days of cinema when he was getting his start as an art director in the British studio system. And then, of course, I already mentioned Tim Burton. I could talk about German Expressionism all day, and there are few movies as captivating to watch as German Expressionist movies. But unfortunately, we have to keep moving because film history is not getting any younger. But thanks. I hope you check out some of these movies on your own.